Hello, and welcome back to Super Hell, aka the Mystery Spotcast, a show where two recovering Supernatural fans subject themselves to a rewatch so no one else ever has to watch Supernatural again. My name is Ollie. I use any pronouns, and you can find me on social media at OllieFresh. That's fresh with a PH.
And my name is Klaudia. My pronouns are she, her, and you can find me on social media at Klaudia Says, K-A-L-U-D-I-A Says.
We have some emergency updates for you guys. We have a couple. So one is a personal life update. So I got married, which has been very exciting. And that's like definitely surprise. It's probably the least exciting thing that I'm going to talk to you about today.
Sorry, Mel.
I'm just kidding. It's for me personally, it's the most exciting thing. But for fandom culture, it's probably not. It probably doesn't even break top 10 most important things. But that's not the point. This is a fandom-based podcast. Oh, wow.
That's dark.
That's so dark. But it's true. I mean, we're a freaking Supernatural podcast.
God.
So there's a couple different things that for the culture. But I wanted to say also, this episode's going to be a little bit different just because I know we're going to be kind of off the shits. And if we don't want this episode to be 4.5 hours long, we need to condense. So we're just going to be talking about one episode of Supernatural today, and we'll do that in the latter half. So just keep that in mind. I don't know. What do we want to talk about first?
So first, we're going to talk about how Studio Mappa canceled the Yuri on Ice movie on the same day.
On the same day as freaking 9/11 for Supernatural fans. Guys, we will get into what the Supernatural news is, but I want to make you wait a little bit because there's been so much drama in fandom. So first of all, for those of you who don't know, Yuri on Ice is an anime. I guess was. I mean, it still is. It still exists.
I feel like I made a TikTok about this on our account for the podcast, but I feel like the Yuri on Ice kiss moment, which if you know, you know, when that happened in 2016, that was the first November 5th, 2020. Like, if you didn't know, because it's a sports anime, and there's a lot of sports anime that are very, like, gay baiting, but when it actually was gay, like, nobody saw that shit coming. From a mile, like, people went crazy, and I'm sure a lot of people experienced it by osmosis. I was one of those people. I did not actually watch it until recently, because I was like, oh, I'll wait till the movie comes out. Well, and then my friend Cash was like, no, you will watch Yuri on Ice or die. And so then I was like, all right, fine, I will. It is worth the hype. It's only 12 episodes. It moved me. Okay. Like, yeah. We were born to make history. But I said was like, the moment, specifically the moment, because it happened at the end of 2016. So it's right after the 2016 election. So we were in I don't know when exactly the Kiss episode aired, but like, it was the same kind of thing that I never thought was going to be gay. That like clearly is gay, but like you people aren't fucking getting it.
It's easier to realize that something is like canonically, intentionally queer in the rear view.
Yeah.
Like, when you're watching something, I think this happens a lot with like, you know, for queer people is like we watch media and we look for ourselves in everything. And not to be like, oh my gosh, we want everything to be gay. But it's like when you're so starved for any sort of, you know, and not just like, it kind of irks me sometimes when people frame everything as being representation. Because it is representation, don't get me wrong. But it's also like just a compelling storytelling thing. It's a type of story, and like I think that is representation. So I'm not saying like, oh, don't say it's representation, but I think representation shouldn't be the end all be all of looking for queer stories. But I think when queer people watch stuff, and this is why I think like shipping culture is what it is because we are always saying like, how can this be like me, or how can this be like my community, or how, you know, like this is clearly an interesting story that you could tell, and these actors or these characters have chemistry, but you're avoiding it because of, you know, homophobia, or because of, and you know, there's plenty of times where that gets misconstrued and gets like, you know, taken over by fandom, whatever. But I think that we are so used to looking for ourselves in places where they're not intentionally there, that when it is there, we are so like, you need explicit confirmation, or else it's going to be like, well, they're just like baiting us like everything else does. So it's like there has to be something so clear in order for queer people to be like, oh my god, wait, like that's actually there. And for straight people too, like a lot, like I've watched shows with my mom. We watched Our Flag Means Death, and she did not believe that they were actually like gay until like the kiss had happened, and she was still like, oh, that was interesting. And then I had to be like, yeah, they're like gay, and she was like, oh, right, okay. Like it's like you have to hit people over the head with it. And I think like it sucks because there should be room for nuanced storytelling, but like so many people will not get it if you are nuanced, like in this. I had
to tell my parents. I was like, well, yeah, Xena, she's gay. And they were like, no, she likes men. I was like, she kissed a woman multiple times on that show. Like, it was kind of a big deal. I watched it with you guys when I was a kid. What are you talking about? Anyways, we're getting off topic because we're going to get into this, whatever. But the TLDR about Yuri on Ice is that very similar to November 5th, 2020. This show is only 12 episodes long, but it comes from a long storied history of sports anime that queer baits you to get you to watch it, because nobody does queer bait like Japan, where you have BLs, you have shit that's actually gay. But what if we queer bait you, and maybe we're not queer, maybe it's just queer coded in the actual text, but then the merchandise, the marketing around it will be queer baiting on levels absolutely unimaginable. So like, it wasn't just a 12 episode series, it was a long storied history of sports anime. And so then they make this series where everyone's like, it seems like kind of gay, but they're not saying it's a BL. And then like, surprise, they kiss on the mouth, they have rings, whatever. And it was also at a time where politically people were like, I'm gonna fucking lose my mind. And so it was a level of insane that we literally did not reach again until 4 years later, where they were like, hey, remember this thing that you thought would never happen? And then it did happen. And also politically, we are in a place that is crazy. And both times they involved Donald Trump, and that's horrifying.
Listen, as bad as this is a joke, so don't cancel me. Was Donald Trump really that bad? Because he did give us Destiel. That's a joke, guys. That's a joke. Don't come for me. I'm just joking. He was pretty bad. Joe Biden's also pretty bad, though, so don't get it twisted. I'm not. This is not me making a deep-seated political statement that is reflective of my actual views. You can never be too careful these days.
/J.
But the TLDR about Yuri on Ice is that it was an anime about a figure skater and his coach, right?
They're two professional ice skaters, and the one guy's like, I'll be your coach, really, because he just wants to kiss him on the mouth.
In the end, they actually have like canonically gay kiss, which is like no one expected because everyone thought it was just going to be bait. And then they're like, okay, so season 1 is over for like in 2016. And then they're like, oh, we're going to have an anime, like a movie to wrap it up. And just a couple days ago, we're dating this episode, but just a couple days ago, the studio was like, yeah, actually the movie is canceled.
Yeah, and so I have made a couple seconds, but a lot of people are blaming Studio Mappa, which is it's a now very popular anime studio that now makes a lot of pretty major anime, but back then, like, their part on Yuri on Ice, like, made that, like, put them on the map because they did incredible animation to do the skating. Like, they put in a lot of detail and work into it.
I haven't watched the show, but like, I've seen plenty of clips on it. If you were on Tumblr when it was coming out, you have. But it is a really, like, it is a very visually nice show to look at.
Yeah, it's and so like they are not able to make things like Jujutsu Kaisen, Attack on Titan, whatever, without those little gay bitches. And the thing is that anime is made with a production committee, so there's lots of companies involved. And I think about a year ago they came out and they were like, so we didn't make more Yuri on Ice because like it wasn't really our call, and also we wouldn't make most of the money off of it because like we don't really own the IP. So everyone's blaming Studio Mappa, and they do deserve to get their ass beat for lots of reasons, but I don't think that it's specifically just their thing. I will say though that they rode the coattails of gay people for Yuri on Ice, and then they started basically signing on to 100 million projects, and that's how they kind of became like the fast fashion of fucking anime. And they make a lot of things, and they crunch their animators even worse. They're literally like the Netflix of anime. Every
the fast fashion of anime is a crazy word, a crazy term.
They literally animators are treated so badly in anime, and to the point where like it's normal that they don't say anything, but it's so bad at Studio Mappa that they are on Twitter being like, yeah, I was treated like shit. I only worked on this because I like the director, and I like the director, and I will never work for studio. Like, do you know how much it takes for a Japanese animator to say that publicly? That's crazy. Like, So Studio Mappa deserves to get their ass beat. Maybe not completely for this. I would also say, just a flag, I said there is a political element to this. It's not completely, because one of the skater, the main character, the love interest is Russian. Actually, there's two major Russian characters, because there's a young 15-year-old skater who is kind of like his mentee, who's like a third character, who is also Russian, and like Russian skating is kind of a big part of the thing. And in yes, the war against Ukraine was happening at the time, but then Mappa was like, what if I did 100 other projects? I pushed back the Yuri on Ice, and
yeah. There's a slew of issues as to why this kind of became a politically complicated thing to make. Still being like, though, I don't know.
Yeah,
it's a very tumultuous sort of situation, and I'm kind of on the periphery of it because it has never been an IP that I was like super invested in or knew all that much about. But I guess the point of all of this is to say that there are reasons why it happened and why it has happened like this, but I think that we would be remiss not to mention it as a podcast that talks about fandom
and talks about gay people, because it has been gay people 9/11 this week.
Yeah. Speaking of 9/11, speaking of the digits involved in 9/11, there's another thing that I want to talk about. If I could pivot, if I could take that transition as I will. If you follow me on Twitter, you know that there is a television show that I have been watching and tweeting about nonstop, and it is called 911, and it is on ABC, formerly on Fox. For the first 6 seasons, it was on Fox, then Fox canceled it, and it got picked up by ABC. Within 5 episodes of it being on ABC, I think 4 episodes actually, one of the main characters, who is sort of this, like, he starts off as being almost like the rookie firefighter. So 911 is about, like, first responders, right? And it's about like this, like a 911 operator, and like Angela Bassett plays a police officer, and then there's like this team of like 5 to 7 firefighters depending on the season. But it's pretty consistent. Like, they've had basically the same cast since season 2. Like, there have been a couple additions and a couple people who have become more central characters, but it's had basically the same core cast. I don't think there's anyone who's like, other than someone from the first season, I don't think there's anyone who's, like, left the show, which is crazy for a network show that's been going on that long, that has star power of that level. But the point is that it's about these, the one of the firefighters is a young man who's kind of, like, you know, the first episode is him, like, stealing a fire truck so he can have sex with a woman in it to, like, impress her. And, like, he is, like, kind of, like, this, like, he starts off being kind of, like, a sleazy, like, womanizer, and he does grow over the seasons to be like, okay, I actually treat women really badly.
Does that sound familiar to anyone? Keep that in mind.
But the point is that within the first 4 episodes of him being on ABC, he's like, I'm kissing men now and I'm bisexual. And it was something that people had always been like, oh my gosh, this character Buck. They're like, yeah, Buck is like, he's got bi vibes, and there's this other firefighter who he has crazy chemistry with, who is like, there's so much stuff between them, but it's like, oh my gosh, like, yes, like, Buck has like gay vibes, whatever. So people have always been saying that about him, and then suddenly the show decides to like actually go for it and canonize that he is a boy kisser. And I am like, you know, it's so funny. There's a Supernatural fan account that I saw that was like, Buck becoming canonically bisexual has been hell on earth for Dean Winchester fans. Because I don't want to say that Buck is a lot like Dean, but he kind of has like a similar vibe to him in the way that he's this like sort of macho man is not quite the right word, but someone who performs masculinity out of insecurity and has to unpack a lot of why he feels the need to do that, and why he is not always respectful of women, and why he like sort of why he is the way he is, but is also fiercely devoted to his family, fiercely found family in Buck's case, but fiercely devoted to the people he cares about. And I think the main difference between Dean Winchester and Buck is that Dean has like oldest daughter energy, and Buck has youngest sibling energy.
Oh, wow.
But it's the point is that they fill, I don't know if their characters are all that similar, but they fill a similar archetype in their respective shows, like a character archetype. So,
and on network television, which is, well, the CW is what, cable? No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the point is that Buck, who is, you know, there is a major ship in the show called Buddy, which is the funniest name for a ship, and it's between him and this other character, Eddie, who is another firefighter. But there's this guy who is like sort of like the macho man who is shipped relentlessly by the fandom with his with a male counterpart, a male peer. And then they were like, what if we actually went for it and did it in a, not necessarily for the ship, but what if we made him like queer in a very explicit way and had an episode about him talking to his sister about her being like, you know, you're not like just an ally, you're literally on a date with a man. And then him like coming out to his friends. And I'm like, somewhere I've seen so many TikToks being like, that happened and Jensen Ackles like had a chill up his spine, like something like Dean Winchester found fucking dead in a ditch.
Like, and it was crazy because like because that happened, I know like 7 people who started watching 911,
me included.
And then if you go look at the data, they had like absolutely insane watch numbers. When I say the girls and the gays move merchandise from Yuri on Ice to 911, like they move like they change lives.
No, it had like 111% uptick in viewership of
live
that one episode. Like it is
live
like,
viewership.
Yeah, and not just like, I think their stats for like live plus the 7 days after the episode aired, which is what a lot of metrics are based on now, was like this insane uptick. So it's like them making a character bisexual has now increased their viewership. A show that was canceled by Fox last season, it has increased their viewership in a wild way. And I'm like, I just know the Supernatural the Supernatural execs, producers, whoever, who were like, well, we can't do anything with that because it's not, you know, whatever, we don't want to do. I know that they are all rolling in their graves right now. I know that the CW is not happy.
Well, and the crazy thing is that like this is a show that is like, I mean, and I haven't watched it, so correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like, you know, they love making a propaganda network show for everybody to watch. Mm-hmm. And so, and it includes so much of the hashtag woke agenda in it, because let me be clear.
Yeah.
These are not the first gay people. A
yeah.
lot of people of color in the show in general. It is like,
yeah,
like whatever, but it's like propaganda at the same time. Shout out to Brooklyn Nine-Nine, whatever.
I'm not gonna lie. I feel like this show does actually have episodes where it talks about like how the police can be bad. And, like, there is an episode where Angela Bassett, her character Athena, does play, like, she is a cop. She's a police sergeant in L.A., but there's an episode where her daughter is writing her college essays, and she titles her college essay "Living with the Enemy." about how it feels to live with a cop.
Okay, that kind of eats.
No, I'm gonna say, May Grant, you are the best character. No, but there's that. But there's also like, one of the main relationships in the show, and like one of the main characters is a Black lesbian who, it's about her and her relationship with her wife, who's also Black, and like their son, and the complications that their family faces. There are multiple episodes like that, like deconstruct like systemic racism in policing and in like most of the stories about like the Firehouse Squad. Like Athena's there to be a cop, just like sometimes. Also, Athena, one of the big things in the first season is her trying to come to terms with the fact that she has to get a divorce from her husband, because in the first episode, her husband's like, I'm gay.
This is my thing.
It's like, there is, and he's also Black. So like, there are 3 major queer characters that from season 1, all of whom are Black.
Well, and this is why I feel like this ship was so crazy, because people were like, and I feel like a grade A queer bait is the kind where the show already has gay people. They have no problem with gayness at all. There's no problem with gayness. So why are you baiting these other bitches? There have been gay people inside the house the whole time. Like, to me, that's another, because some people I made a joke about this on TikTok, and people tried to fight with me. They're like, well, it's not queer bait and you only care whatever. I'm like, no, I think it's actually funnier when there's been gay people the whole time and we're talking about queerness and identity the entire time. and it's like basically included in this world. These characters are friends with gay people, whatever, but they're like, this one is a is a caricature. So that, not a caricature, is this one is a queer code and whatever. That is always the wildest kind. Dean Winchester being one of them. There's plenty of gay people not handled well because this was the early 2000s, but there's a lot of other gay people in well, I would also say 911 is an ensemble show as well, which I think
absolutely
also makes it different. But
yeah,
I think that's why it's so funny, because it's like you baited this for what? And now they're like, no, it wasn't bait. He's just bi. And you're like, oh, shit.
Oh, it's a win. There's also one of the funniest scenes on television, I think, is Buck is talking to, like, he is literally on a date with a man, and the man is like, oh, it's kind of like surprising that, like, you know, I didn't expect you to like guys. And he's like, well, you know, I mean, I don't know why everyone's surprised. Like, I've always been an ally. Like, I post a rainbow on my Instagram every Pride. And it's like that. There's that. Then, like, literally, I think it's later in that episode, this character is talking to his older sister, who is honestly, I'm like, sure, Buddy is great, whatever. The best ship on this show is two other characters who are, I'm like, I'm so sorry. Every time they're on screen together, I want to start crying because they're just so good. But he is like talking to his sister, and he's like, well, I mean, you know, so this is something. I'm like, I have read this exact line in Destiel fan fiction.
I was just gonna say.
She's like, but his sister is like, you know, like, I didn't know you were like interested in guys. And he's like, well, you know, I mean, I'd always, you know, I always thought girls were hot, but, you know, sometimes I'll check out a hot guy's ass. I didn't know that meant anything. I'm like, that's
literally, I've read that for years. As,
no,
like,
literally.
Dean Winchester. Like, I because I know that there are people who are Destiel shippers who work in television, I know one of you bitches works on 911. No. I know you do.
I have to say about this show, too, and I think that many people know, but one of the creators of this show, two of the creators of this show, are Ryan Murphy and Brad Falchuk.
Well, and wasn't Ryan Murphy, like, an executive producer in, like, season 1 and then left or something? The best Ryan Murphy productions are the ones where he's just kind of there and somebody else is like Pose, like, and because the first season of Pose, you can really feel when he was there, and then when he eased off the fucking gas and let somebody else fucking drive, I'm like, oh, that makes sense. That's why it's crazy making, and there's a lot of gay people doing crazy bullshit.
There's a character on that show that, like, the moment he walked in, I was like, oh, this is a Ryan Murphy show. But then he was like it was like he was kind of like introduced, I believe, like, he was introduced like as an actual like character in season 2. But then it's like, now it's like, oh, now he's like an actual character. But when he first shows up, I was like, oh my god, this gay little 911 operator is so, like, I forgot that this was a Ryan Murphy show. But it is so funny to me because also Josh Nation, we ride at dawn. But it is so funny to me just because I'm like, Ryan Murphy, we all know, producer and creator of shows like Glee and American Horror Story. I'm like, Ryan Murphy is going directly to hell when he dies. Like, no pearly gates. Like, he's going straight down. But everyone who's worked as a producer on one of his shows that has ended up being good is, like, immediately going to be sitting at the right hand of God.
Yeah. The other thing also about 911 is, like, because people are like, oh, why do you keep like comparing it to Destiel? A lot of people, once they finish Supernatural, there are a lot of Supernatural fans went to watching 911 because a bitch loves a procedural. Like, people are like, what do they have in common? I'm like, it's a procedural. It's a procedural that has a bunch of actually gay people this time, not implied gay people. It's a procedural that has a bunch of absolutely whack shit going on. And then gay people gazing longingly at each other. That is supposed to be for middle America, but is really for the queer. Like, yeah, that's what Supernatural is. Like, of course. So that's where the comparisons come from.
It's also just like, I cannot recommend it enough. There are a lot of moments where it has some kind of whack politics. There's one episode in particular where I was like, oh, this is not good. Like, this isn't really... There's a couple episodes where, like, the politics are not good, because at its core, it is, like, propaganda. Not, like...
Some of the best TV, American TV, is always going to be propaganda, unfortunately.
But it's, like, there is, like, one episode that's, like, about, Athena, who I love. Like, I think she's a really good character, but she's played by Angela Bassett, who is an executive producer on the show. But it is so funny to me because there is, like, a couple moments where I'm just like, oh no, this is not good. This is not good. But most of the time though, she's kind of like if cops were like what people who liked cops thought cops actually did.
Yeah.
Because it's like there's a part where like she shows up and like there's one episode where like they're not letting anyone leave a plane. And, like, the airport cop is being a real shithead because he's like, well, the CEO of the airline said I wasn't allowed to let anyone leave the plane. And she walks in and is like, well, I'm going to arrest everyone. They're in my custody and we're leaving the plane. Come on, guys. And everyone starts clapping.
And everybody clapped.
And it's like there's a part where there's, like, a natural disaster. And there's this guy who's, like, owns a convenience store and he's, like, not letting anyone in because he's like, and he's, like, jacking up his prices. Like, it's like he's charging, like, $100 for a case of water. And, like, she's like, you're going to let these people in and charge them a discount. And he's like, okay, fine, 5% off. And she goes, mm-mm. And he's like, okay, 10% off. And she's like, mm-mm. And he's like, 50% off. And she's like, that's more like it. So I'm like, Athena Grant is standing up for the little guy until you actually have an episode that talks about policing.
And then you're like, what? But, like, I feel like she's from the same genre of Brooklyn Nine-Nine of, like, oh, you are... I need to watch this when I need to lie to myself. Like,
yeah, basically. Like... but the point is that even if the relationship betwixt like the ship that people are talking about, which is Buck and Eddie, like even if that doesn't become canonized, the fact that they were like, yeah, we hear what you guys are saying and we agree that Buck has bisexual vibes. Like the fact that happened is like, I just know that the whatever CW head who said they shouldn't make Destiel happen is fucking I would say rolling in their grave, but they're probably still alive. Yeah. But it is like rolling in their proverbial grave.
Because like the views on this thing, like from like, Middle America already crazy, and now even crazier. Like
it beat Young Sheldon as being the most watched scripted television show.
Not Gay People versus Autism.
No,
oh my
I know.
God.
Also, I found out a fun fact about Young Sheldon, which I know, sorry, it's Young Sheldon update, but is that in Big Bang Theory, one of the big things is that Sheldon's, like, his dad sucks because his dad cheated on his mom and, like, fundamentally changed his life. But in Young Sheldon, they started writing it, and, like, the guy who, like, the character who's his dad was so cool that they were like, oh, like, he wouldn't, like, we've written this character who wouldn't do that. So they changed the lore to be that Sheldon saw his mom and dad, like, messing around, but his mom was wearing a wig, so he just thought it was someone else.
Wait, that's so much worse. Like, that's... Why? That's...
I don't know, but...
Wow.
There's also, you know, it's funny, we're, like, 30 minutes into the recording, and...
we haven't gotten to the main event.
We haven't gotten to the main event. I think we just wanted to update you guys on the state of
gay television.
The state of gay television.
I will say, Korra from The Legend of Korra walked so that Buck 911 could run.
No, I'm just saying the amount of no, because Buck respects women now. He's gone through his respect women arc, and he's always respected queer women. So I think that he would stan Korra.
Absolutely.
I think that he would not. Also I have to say his actor Oliver Stark, who plays him, like there was honestly, it was pretty overwhelmingly positive, like a response to this, but there were people who were like, hold on, I need to pull up the tweet because it's genuinely so freaking funny. But in an interview, because people were like, it's weird that like, oh, like that Buck is like gay now and I'm not interested, and he basically says, I can't find the tweet right now. Or the interview quote, but basically he says in this interview, he's like, it's so funny when women and like people are like, oh well, I don't find Buck attractive anymore because he's bisexual. Well, he's not real, so you never had a chance with him.
found dead in Miami. Like, unfortunately, you're never gonna be like Jensen Ackles. You're never gonna be him. Like,
no, I literally am reading all these interviews with Oliver Stark where he's being like, there's another one where it's like this interview and that's like, well, like, what do you feel about all of like any backlash? And he says, I truly don't care.
He's like, I am getting a network residual check. Who gives a fuck?
No, it's so funny because I'm like, this is an actor who also like he also had like a really slay Instagram like story where he was like, I truly don't care what you guys think. If you're watching the show and you have a problem with this character being bisexual, then clearly you have missed the point of the show, which preaches inclusion and talks about how everyone is different. And he's like, this show has one of the like an amazing love story between two Black lesbians played by two of the best actors that I know, and you have a problem with this? Like, you guys need to get a fucking grip.
Like,
and he is like, I'm sorry. It's like, I'm reading all this stuff and I don't mean to like, I feel like he is like low-key doing the bare minimum because I'm like, this is just what you would expect someone to say. But based on like Jensen Ackles, I think all the fucking time about at this one convention where someone was like, if you were a Supernatural fan for a while, you know about this, where someone comes up and is like, you know, Dean Winchester like really helped me come to terms with like my own bisexuality. And he says, let's not talk about that. Let's not go there. And I'm like, and shuts this fan down. And I'm like, I think about that all the time compared to this. I'm like, oh my god.
Like, I feel like, because I think that's also why people are like, they're always like, holy shit, because like, when they just embrace it, writers, actors, whatever, like, it's a good time, it's whatever, but Supernatural chooses to be like, no, we're gonna be homophobic about it in the wildest, most creative ways possible.
Yeah, and there's also there's an interview that just released, like a podcast interview where Oliver Stark is like, and they ask him, you know, they're talking about Buck being bi, and a lot of the times like this happens too, and then they ask about like a ship, and the actor's like, oh, I don't want to talk about that, but they're like, oh, so was there a future for Buck and Eddie? And he's like, you know, I want to be really mindful, like, I don't write this story, so I don't know, like, I can't tell you what's gonna happen. But, you know, you want to be mindful and make sure that, like, we don't have this character come out and then suddenly all his male friends, like, want him. Like, that would be kind of a shitty way to do this. And also, you know, like, if we were going to go that way, we would just have to be really, like, mindful and careful of it. But I'd be down. He says, he's like, you know, he's like, I'd be down to explore that story. He's like, I don't know if I would say, like, I want it to happen or if I'm, like, you know, I don't make the rules. But, like, you know, I'd be open to explore that story. And I'm like, that is something that I'm like, I have, it is so rare to hear an actor say that kind of thing in response to something like that. Especially, and like, there's plenty of actors who have said that kind of stuff, but to say it with such a genuineness that isn't like, oh my god, I love my friend and it would be fun to do whatever. But like, and also like on a television show this big,
instead of coming out as bisexual and then going back in the closet like Misha Collins.
Oh my gosh.
I'm so
sorry. I'm sorry that we have talked for so long about not Supernatural.
But we had to in order to get to the main event. Speaking of people who work on the TV show saying things.
People who, as Claudia said, speaking of people who work on a television show, then saying something that makes you be like,
what?
Oh my god, what? So, for those of you who don't know, there is a gentleman named Ben Edlund. He is a writer and executive producer and executive producer, co-executive producer. Like, I think the wiki lists him as being, here, I'm gonna pull up his Supernatural wiki page. It says he's a writer, executive producer, co-executive producer, and consulting producer on Supernatural from seasons 2 to 8. And this is also, keep in mind, like, there were technically like showrunners like Eric Kripke, especially from seasons like 1 to 5, but there is like, this was before the time where showrunners were really a thing. So your executive producers were kind of the people who were doing like the showrunner job. And like, you know, there are other people who are like working on running the show, but he was one of the people who was like doing a lot. He you know, worked on obviously the whole show, but he wrote episodes, like especially one that I want to point out. First of all, he wrote the Ghostfacers episode, which, you know, is crazy because the power of
gay love.
The power of gay love can pierce the veil of death.
Yeah.
He also wrote Monster Movie, which is an episode I love. Dean being rehymenated. He's crazy. He's his mind.
Jonathan Harker, Dean Winchester.
He also wrote an episode called The End, and he has talked a little bit about that episode, so that's important. And we haven't gotten to the episode on our show, but basically the premise is that Dean gets, like, pushed into the future and sees, like, this is what the apocalypse has wrought. And there's a lot of scenes where, like, Cass is there, but he's, like, not himself anymore. Like,
he's got a beard.
He's got a beard. He is a total stoner, but he's also like, Dean, you're like that girl. You're the only thing that really matters to me. Whatever. But he wrote those two, or he wrote a lot of those episodes, and again was an executive producer. There is a podcast called Supernatural Then and Now, which is hosted by Rob Benedict and Richard Speight Jr., who are both actors. They play Chuck and Gabriel respectively. They have also, I know that Richard Speight Jr. has, like, directed an episode as well, so it's like they've both been very involved to the point of being in production. Didn't
one of them direct the 200th episode, the fuck-ass musical?
I think that is true. I'm not entirely sure.
I don't remember.
But the point is that this is, like, it's the closest thing to an official Supernatural podcast that you can get, right?
Excuse me, we are the official Supernatural What the fuck are you talking about? Sorry.
But I found out about this because they have a Patreon where they do, like, Patreon exclusive, like, interviews and stuff. And Twitter user at Chris Hay, KRISHAY 89 tweeted a screenshot which is titled Bonus Clip, Ben Edlund Talks. And then the description is, in this clip, Ben Edlund discusses a rewritten Dean Destiel scene and the impressive things the crew comes up with. And this person shared that screenshot and said, OMG, these bonus clips on Patreon, at Ben Edlund, saying lines he wrote about Dean and Castiel were changed because the subtext was too obvious and it had to be buried. I saw this because Ben Edlund himself responds to this tweet and says, there's so much to be said regarding Destiel. I entertain its possibility, but I'm not absolute. It lives on the periphery of the story I was involved in telling. I cannot speak for show past season 8, but I appreciate the intensity of feelings here and wish to show only respect.
First of all, the way that is phrased is crazy.
The fact that
what?
Okay, the fact that he referred to it as Destiel is also, I'm like, oh my god, like this, it's not like, oh, Dean and Cass's relationship or Dean and Cass, it's Destiel as a ship. I'm like, you're already using the language. This is crazy.
And he's like, so I entertain its possibility. First of all, that sounds like the title of a Destiel fic, first of all.
Yeah. And it's just like, but okay. So this fundamentally changes how I view Supernatural. I'm going to also read, before we get too into discussing it, I'm going to read something that he says. I'm going to read this out, and it's from that. But basically, Rob Benedict is like, there's, in the episode, The End, basically Cass is like, I'm a stoner now and I fuck mad women and that's what I do. Like, I go to orgies all the time, whatever. And it was already like, we'll get to it again when we get to this episode in our show. So I won't give you like too much of it, but that's the TLDR, is that Dean is in the future. Cass is a stoner who does orgies because he is like nothing to live for. And the line that aired, as Rob Benedict says in this interview, he says, so the line that aired, Castiel says, I used to belong to a much better club, and now I'm powerless, hapless, I'm hopeless. I mean, why the hell not bury myself in women and in decadence, right? It's the M, baby. That's what decadence is for. Why not bang a few gongs before the lights go out? But then that's just how I roll. So it's like basically Cass being like, well, because Cass also in this is not like, he does not have his angelic powers. So he's basically like, well, fuck it. Like, I'm here on Earth. I have no power. I'm hopeless. Like, I'll just fuck women and do drugs, whatever. And then he goes on to say what the script reads, which is what had to be changed. The script reads, The only thing I think we have left, Dean and me, is each other. If Dean says it's time to get out in a blaze of glory, win or lose, so be it. I'm in, but then that's just how I roll. So removing all of the talk of, like, I fuck women to being, like, Dean and I are the only things that matter in this world.
Like, and if you remember, in previous episodes, we talk all the time about how they had to paper over a moment of Dean having genuine emotion or talking about Destiel or another man with, yeah, I fuck bitches and get money. And yes, later on, they flip that and do that with Destiel. So to get the confirmation that they literally did it on purpose is mind-blowing.
Yeah, Ben Edlund says in response to that line, he says, I mean, like, that was either a rewrite based on a note or something that it's possible that there was a shift in language that came from a pass through Kripke. To me, that feels like a rewrite based on, okay, we know what the subtext is, bury it a little. And he kind of goes on to have, like, this little thing where he's like, you know, it's like, it's interesting to have this, like, kind of scale back the language because, like, you want to go to the core of it, but it doesn't seem necessary in this context. Like, clearly in this, because the thing is, in this episode, it's the end of the world, right? But Ben Edlund is like, this guy is still hanging around. He's going on a mission. He's like, basically he's saying, like, you know, Cass is still hanging around in this world and he's still doing everything for Dean. And basically he's like, Dean is like, we need to go on a suicide mission and there's no hope. That's what you're like. And Dean's like, yeah, that's what I'm saying. And Cass is like, okay, yeah, sure, I'll do it. So it's like the subtext he is saying, Ben Edlund is saying, the subtext is clearly there.
You just don't have to
Destiel is
rub
there,
it in
but
more.
It's like we didn't feel like we needed to say it because it was too on the nose.
I don't know if you guys have picked up on is an insane thing to say of like, oh yeah. Like, well, Destiel's already a thing. We just felt like it would be a little too. What do you mean?
No, and I know that what he's saying is like, okay, so we wanted to keep it kind of as subtext, but him saying, like, it's always on the periphery of the story we're telling, because Klaudia and I have joked many times on this podcast, being like, you know, they've written Dean so straight and so macho that he comes around to be gay, but it's like, oh my god, like, they actually, like, the thing in the fandom, too, is that people were always telling people who shipped Destiel, like, people who weren't Destiel shippers, like, you guys are crazy and imagining things, but it's like, no, the Destiel subtext was intended, so people being crazy about it was like people were noticing things that were actually there textually that were intended to be there. And again, it's like
it's a crazy making in a way of like, okay, so there's other gay people and you're like, oh yeah, this is just a thing on the periphery, but we don't have time for all that. What do you mean we don't have time for all that? He's a main character. What do you mean?
It's like, it's just like, I think that this fundamentally changes, like, I'm not joking when I say this fundamentally changes how I view the story, because a lot of it was like, oh, Dean, like Misha Collins was like, yeah, I wasn't playing Cass as being, like, actually in love with Dean until season 15, but it's like, okay, so, like, written, it is intended, be it subtextually, but it is intended that those feelings and that connection between them was always there from the start.
Yeah, also, Ben Edlund literally says, mainly because all the other aspects of that story tell us that. Show us it actually. That's the whole thing. Show us, not tell. So basically they were like, once again, we have to blame the Iowa Writers Workshop for the fact that they weren't kissing on the mouth and fucking nasty. No, I'm kidding. but he's like, oh yeah, like, we just went for show, don't tell. What? And again, as we've said on this podcast before, rewatching Supernatural in the context of what happens on November 5th, 2020, and the confession is already crazy. But now we are rewatching it in the season where Destiel is introduced with this new context. I feel like I've ripped back another layer and I'm like, huh? What? Yeah. What do you mean? Like,
I'm so happy that this came out now, though, in our watching of this show.
Literally.
And it didn't come out, like, after we'd already talked about, like, all these seasons, and then we would have to, like, release a statement being like, hey, guys, sorry about all the seasons that we've talked about. Actually, they were gay, and we're not just being crazy. It's like, no, they actually, like, that was, like, intended. And I know it's, like, probably the way he's saying it, like, he's not saying, like, oh, we were waiting for it to go canon or we were doing whatever. But the fact that the subtext was there is enough for me to be like, oh my god, like, this is founded. This is not just, like, people watching and being like, hey, isn't it crazy that, like, they do this stuff or whatever? Like, it's like, no, this was from the start it was there. Like, that was written in the periphery. Like, do you guys realize how crazy this is? I feel like I've been trying to talk about it, like, all week since I saw this, and I'm like, no one gets it. No one gets it. It's just me and Klaudia who get it, and also a lot of other people, but people I know personally, because
I want you guys to imagine, and again, this has been how many years? Over a decade like this, whatever. I want you to imagine this news dropping the same day as them announcing, no, the Yuri on Ice movie is never coming. I felt like I was being attacked on all sides. Like, I was like, what do you mean? And it also, again, it's very much a thing of, like, gay, but in the most homophobic way. But, like, what do you mean? You're like, no, we don't have time to unpack all that because we're really trying to show, don't tell, and it's a subtle thing we're doing on the side, whatever. I'm like, it's kind of homophobic, but it's also not, but it's also, like, it's Schrodinger's homophobia, like, the way that we have joked about it the whole time, it literally was. And you're like, huh? That's crazy. That's crazy. Also the implication that Eric Kripke was like, no, keep that gay shit out of here. Like,
common Eric Kripke L. No.
What? Like,
I'm just kidding. I do think that Eric Kripke was one of the most, was a very effective showrunner.
Yeah.
In terms of consistency and in terms of consistent quality. But, like, I'm just, like, the fact that, because the other thing, too, he doesn't say Kripke is, like, get that gay shit out of here. He's just saying, like, we need to not be super over. I mean, he is basically saying get that gay shit out of here, but I don't think he's saying it in, like, a homophobic way. So
he's saying it in
for liability reasons, this is not us saying Eric Kripke is homophobic.
I think, again, much like all of Supernatural, he's homophobic kind of like by implication almost. Like, he's like, oh, we gotta cut that gay shit out of there because we just don't have time, we gotta focus on the plot. But, like, they kept doing that the whole time. Like, huh? What do you mean?
The main thing, though, I think to take away from this is that whenever we have watched, take this also retroactively for our past episodes too, whenever we have watched them and like, oh my god, like, they are so sick and twisted for this, and they probably don't even realize they're doing it. They do realize they're doing it, and it's on purpose.
And maybe it's because Jensen Ackles didn't want to play gay. Probably.
Okay, but Jensen Ackles has played gay before, so
which is
wild. Yeah, anyway, the point is that it's like Destiel is real. Like, Destiel, like, it's like, real. I feel like it's real, and I'm keep getting reaffirmed 4 fucking years after the show has ended.
And the price was Yuri on Ice. That was the price. Was it worth it? What did it cost? Everything. It's fine. It's fine. I'm okay. I'm good.
I guess that is our sort of, that is to wrap up our sort of roundup on the state of queer network television.
The state of queer network television is, don't watch Supernatural. Do watch 911 and Yuri on Ice. More at 11.
Yeah. And I will say one more thing. This is the last thing I'll say about 911, probably. No, there's probably one other time where I'm going to say something about 911 in this episode. But the thing about this, 911 is the best show on television, but it is, I'm not kidding. The first episode had me fucking hooked, sitting on the edge of my seat.
We love a good pilot.
In the first episode, they're like, la la la, we're doing our little thing. And then, but they get a call from a guy who's high out of his mind on sativa, and then he's like, I heard a baby crying in my wall, and them trying to figure out if there's a baby in the wall that has been abandoned, and it is so fucking crazy. It's so good. It's just such a good show. Also, there's a lot of, there's just so much, and the acting is so good, and I'm like, again, Buddy is there, Buck is bi, but he is not even they are not even the best ship on the show. Madney Nation, we stay strong, we stay winning.
So, ironically, the episode that we are going to talk about today, once again, does not have Castiel. It does have instances of Dean being like, I'm what? A hetero. So just, although we've talked about Destiel a lot, that will be not occurring today. So let's get into it. Season 4, episode 8, Wishful Thinking.
A little on the nose, but okay.
Yeah. Oh, and this one's written by Ben Edlund and Lou Ballo, and directed by Robert Singer. That's also why I knew the cinematography was eating it up. Oh, shout out to Robert Singer. He's always...
shout out to Robert Singer. I feel like he's he's also someone who's probably going to hell, right?
Yeah, probably, but
directly.
he kind of eats the girls up in some ways. But I'll just flag, there are some things in this episode that are questionable, to say the least.
Yeah, it's a little, But I would say I texted Klaudia. I watched it yesterday and I texted Klaudia and was like, it was a pretty good episode with some period typical misogyny, you know?
Yeah, misogyny and
some
racism.
Period typical racism.
You're
It's definitely not the most racism or misogyny we'll see in this show, but it's also really funny. Sorry to bring up 911 again, but it's funny because I've watched like 4 seasons of 911 in like a week.
Damn.
And it's also like, it has like 18 episodes each season. There's like, I think the first season has 10, and there's like the COVID season that has 14 episodes, but the other seasons have 18 episodes. But I've been watching that, and like they're so like hashtag woke on that show that going back and watching this, I was like, whoa.
It's like, Jesus. Like,
no, I'm like Buck would never say anything about Asian women.
Like, Dean Winchester, I'm killing you with hammers. I think that's what this episode should be called. Dean Winchester, I'm killing you with hammers. Because, so, the episode opens. I want to say that this woman is maybe taking a shower, like, at the gym. Yeah, she's taking a shower at the gym. So, she's, like, at a communal shower. It's very, like, a horror opener where there's a woman showering alone. And she like gets out of the shower, she goes to like the sinks there, whatever, and she goes to like take her hair towel and like throw it to the thing behind her. And it doesn't land where she threw it. It lands over the head of someone invisible standing behind her, as if there was a ghost there. And she's like, what? And starts screaming. And then this person is like, oh my God, I'm sorry, whatever, and is clearly like stuttering, whatever, and she's like, oh my God, and she's screaming.
But he's also like, the other thing too about this scene is that it is that, but it's also like, we see her in the shower, and like while she's in the shower, we see a guy standing behind her, and then she turns around and he disappears.
Yeah,
and then like we see his like wet footprints behind her,
but he's invisible.
Yeah, and then she throws the towel and it lands on him, and he's like, Mrs. Armstrong, I'm so sorry. Please don't tell my mom.
And you're like, what?
Yeah.
And then it's like Supernatural, and you're like, oh God, here we go.
I'm like, not a peeping Tom. Another thing I want to mention, I can't remember if we mentioned it in our last episode. I think we did. But in the previously on, it shows a lot of clips from the last episode. I need to start watching the previously ons more, because I feel like they are always an indicator of like what an episode, like what vibes you're supposed to be getting from an episode. But there's one of the things is that Uriel in the last episode, he is like accosting Sam at the end, and he's like, you know what? We told you not to use your fuck-ass powers. If you use them again, I will turn you into a smoldering piece of ash. But, you know, and he's like, oh, well, you're supposed to protect, like, Dean, whatever. And he's like, well, why don't you ask Dean what he remembers from hell? Because his ass has been lying to you.
Uriel? Damn, like, he's on bitch mode.
He is a bitch. I'm not going to lie, he is a little cunty. But yeah, the point is in the last episode, he was like, you should ask Dean what he remembers from hell. And we will know that Dean told Sam, like, he's like, I don't remember anything from hell. But we know that's not true.
Yeah.
As the viewer. Sam does not know that.
Yeah. So it cuts to, now in the wiki it says elsewhere over shots. They are at some sort of, it's not a diner. It's like, maybe like a chain restaurant. I'm not really sure.
It's kind of like it's honestly kind of like a restaurant, like a bar restaurant.
Yeah.
Almost like there's definitely a bar and there is definitely a restaurant aspect. It almost looks kitschy. Like the waiter is wearing like a funky little uniform.
The waiter keeps asking them questions of like, do you want this thing, whatever? And Dean's like, no, like, fuck off. And you're like, Dean, be nice. Be nice.
To be fair, it's really funny because him and Sam are having this kind of like in-depth conversation, and he keeps coming over and he's like, so do you guys want to get a dessert? And they're like, no, we don't want a dessert. And he's like, well, are you sure? Because the ice cream is really good. And they're like, stop.
And they're like, we're talking about going to hell.
Yeah, like, please fuck off.
It's so, Sam confronts him and he's like, be fucking for real. yeah, like, you said you don't remember hell. And Dean's like, yeah, I don't, whatever. And they kind of get in a fight into it about it.
Meanwhile, Dean is doing shots the whole time.
Yeah, which normally he's a beer guy, so you're like, oh, okay, girl.
At first, I thought it was one of those little trays, like when you go to a brewery or to like. They also have. It's mostly at breweries, but they have this like bar restaurants too, where it's like you can get a little sampler, so it'll like you'll get like 5 or 6 of their beers like in little cups. That's what I thought it was at first, but then he starts like throwing them back like shots,
and you're like, oh, all right, you good?
So like, he just did like 5 shots, and I think it was probably like
no,
a whiskey.
I don't remember hell. Anyway, Sam, we gotta work. And you're like,
yeah. Sam's like, girl, why did Uriel tell me that you remembered hell if you said you don't remember it? He's like, I don't know. He's a dick. Like, he was just gonna try to destroy an entire town, so I don't know what to tell you. He could be lying.
Yeah, and Sam's like, okay, girl. And he's like, anyway, I want to investigate this thing. And they're like, okay, so there was this spirit that attacked this woman in the shower. But, like, they said that, like, might have, like, pushed her down or something.
Yeah. But she got pushed down a flight of stairs, I think. And it's, like, this newspaper article that they're looking at.
Yeah. Shout out to print media. So.
This is another very funny line from Dean. Because Sam is like, Dean, we need to, like, let's work. Like, let's come on. And Dean's like, women? Showers? We gotta save these people.
Yeah, and this is another point where you're like, okay, Dean, we get it. You like women.
It's giving performative.
Yeah, like, it very much like, and why are we being creepy? Come on, mama, let's whatever. It cuts to what I like to call this entire episode Vancouver tourism ad, which, number one, they have used the set of this little town in multiple episodes. You will see.
Mm-hmm.
I think they've used it. I think they used it maybe in the Mystery Spot episode. Like, they've used it definitely in episodes before. But specifically, like, they have some great vistas in this, and you're like, this is Vancouver.
Yeah, it's like you can't try to pretend that it isn't. I love Supernatural because they always, like, there was an episode a little while ago that we had talked about where they're like, yes, we're in Colorado, and I'm like, that is Canada. Like, that is not what, like, there's mountains, but that's not what the mountains in Colorado look like.
No. Or they're like, this is Philadelphia. I'm like, that's Vancouver, honey. Yeah, I know it is. So here we get to a part. I don't know why. I guess they just decided to meet up with this woman who was attacked at this restaurant. I think that's what the reason. They decided to meet her at this Chinese restaurant.
Sam meets her.
Well, Sam meets her at this Chinese restaurant called Lucky Chin's. And you think, like, oh, it's just like a normal, like, sit-in Chinese restaurant, whatever. There's this couple that he sees when he walks in who are being, like, super lovey-dovey and, like, kind of obnoxious. And he's like, what the fuck? And then, like, keeps going and meets up with this woman. And he sits down with this woman. Her name is Candace. And she starts to tell him about what happens. And you come to realize that Sam is not doing his normal thing of, like, oh, I'm from the FBI or I'm a reporter. He's like, yeah, I'm writing a book about my travels investigating the supernatural.
Yeah, tentatively. She's like, what did you, because you learn this because she's like, so, like, she's trying to tell her story of, like, what happened.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, yeah, and it's like, it was a ghost, and, like, he knew my name, and, like, you know, like, whatever. And what did you say your book was called again? And Sam's like, oh, yeah, it's just a book. It's about, like, you know, my travels across the U.S. looking into paranormal happenings. It's titled Supernatural, tentatively.
What do you think? Okay, when Chuck's books came out, which were called Supernatural, what do you think that woman, she's like, did I meet that guy? Like, do you think that she ever thought about that?
Chuck's books were already out by that time, though.
Oh, that's crazy. Maybe she was out of the loop. I don't know. But I don't know why he has chosen this as his specific lie. I'm like, how is this going to help you later? I'm an author doing research. Okay.
Stop it, guys. I'm an author. Sam Winchester. Oh my God. Sam Winchester on Book Talk. BookToker Sam Winchester. That's
I just know Sam Winchester has gotten into some beef about
Sam Winchester has crazy opinions about Sarah J. Maas.
I think
you know what? Never ask a woman her age. Never ask a man his salary. Never ask Sam Winchester his thoughts on Iron Flame.
I know that Dean Winchester is like a really big Brandon Sanderson fan, and he's like popping up in the back of Sam's. I know he's popping up in the back of Sam's videos, being like, "Why are you reading those chicklet books?" I know exactly. I think there's an episode where they actually say something like.
I feel like Dean Winchester would secretly be really into romance novels, but he's too embarrassed to admit it. Like, I'm not gonna lie, Dean Winchester does feel like someone who read The Love Hypothesis because he was like, this looks stupid, and then he read it and was like, I'm kind of eating this up.
No, here's the thing. I think, and I bet somebody has included this in a fan fiction, so if you've seen this in a fan fiction, please send it to us. Because he was always just like sitting in motels and bored all the time, I think he got really into mass market paperbacks that were like at the grocery store and stuff like that because he had nothing else to read.
He's read hella James Patterson air quote novels.
I think that he has beef against James Patterson. I think he's reading like old bodice rippers that were at the checkout counter. And so when so when romance novels started to have the fuck ass cartoon covers, like I know he's got some crazy opinions about that, and he's like, no, they don't make them like they used to. So this woman is like, she's like, like this ghost, like it kind of like knew my name, and it was saying like, you know. And he was like, well, did it push you? Like, are you hurt? She's like, no, actually, like, I fell and it helped me up. And he's like, what the fuck? And he's like, huh, that's weird. And he keeps looking over at this couple who's being, like, kind of loud and obnoxious in this restaurant. I don't know when they meet back up with Dean. But Dean is like, yeah, I didn't find any EMF at the gym. And, I think they're walking out on like a pier again, Vancouver tourist ad or whatever, and they're like,
they're at like a lake basically,
and they're like, I don't know, like, so this, like, there's definitely something weird here, but it doesn't feel like a ghost, whatever. And then they're looking in the newspaper and they see that like a local man like won the lottery, and they're like, okay, there's something weird happening, and they turn.
They are also kind of talking about though being like is anything real? Like, they're kind of still debating on, like, if there's a case here.
Yeah.
Because Dean is like, yeah, like, I didn't find anything. And Sam's like, well, sorry, I know you wanted to, like, save a bunch of naked women. He's like, you bet I did.
And you're like, we get it, Dean. You're straight. Like, again, it's very heavy-handed. And they then hear right next to them, there's a guy who's like arguing with a police officer or a park ranger, being like, no, like I saw it, whatever. And they're like, no.
Another thing that happens is that like as they're overhearing these guys arguing, a group of kids runs by.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh my God, we gotta go. And they're like, oh, these kids are going. And then Dean shouts, run, Forrest, run at them. And I'm like, dude, they don't get that reference. They're like 7.
Like, Dean, you are an old man. Like,
yeah.
God, they're like, don't forget, Dean likes what? Women and classic films. And you're like, we get it. Like,
yeah.
Okay. And so, but then this guy, he's like, he's yelling, he's whatever. And he's like, I know, like it had to be, I don't know what the purported creature did to him. Was it
I think he just said he saw it.
Like, he's like, I know it was Bigfoot, whatever.
Like he found footprints.
He's like, I know it was Bigfoot, whatever. And they're like, okay, sure, Jan. And they're like, okay, like, what is this? And like, Bigfoot exists, whatever. So
yeah, and they're also like having this conversation where Sam is like, well, you know, any hunter worth his, I think Dean maybe says it, but he's like, you know, any hunter worth his salt knows Bigfoot's not real,
which is hilarious. Like, you guys met
Bigfoot
angels.
Is a hoax.
You met angels. I would believe Bigfoot's real. I would hope Bigfoot was real. So they decided to go into the woods.
That is okay. I'm gonna ask you a question that's kind of like tangentially related. What are your thoughts on Bigfoot? I feel like as a podcast where we talk about Supernatural, we have to have opinions on Bigfoot.
I want to believe. I want to believe.
That's how I feel. I feel like
need some whimsy.
Yeah. It's like, do I actually think Bigfoot is real? Probably not. But do I want Bigfoot to be real? Abso-fucking-lutely.
Absolutely. Shout out to Taz Amnesty. That's just what I think of. No, it's like, is it? No, but I want to believe. I want to believe. Dean has no whimsy. The they go into the woods and they find fucking Bigfoot tracks. And they're like, no, this can't be real, whatever. And they're like, okay, something is going deeply wrong. But then they are led to, like, through the Bigfoot tracks, they are led to a liquor store. And they're like, and it's been raided. Like, things are broken, whatever. And they're like, what the fuck? Like, Bigfoot went to a liquor store? Like, what's going on? They walk out and they find this box that has various pornographic magazines in it and some alcohol and this note that says sorry. And they're like, what the fuck? And then they look up and there's this little girl with a milk crate on the back of her bike who passes by, and another pornographic magazine falls out of the milk crate as they're passing by. And they're like, what the fuck? How does this girl have it? And lo and behold, it is Supernatural's worst running gag, most problematic running gag, which is that Dean Winchester's preference in porn is this thing called busty Asian beauties. And you're like, oh God. And that's what falls in front of them. And they're like, why does this girl have this? What the fuck? God, Supernatural, I wish you would stop. And they're like, okay, this is weird. So they follow her home. Again, you are two grown men. Let's use our thinking brains. They see her bike in front of this house.
They walk in. Also, I knew it was a matter of time before Dean made a Harry and the Hendersons reference.
Oh, yeah.
Because they see it's like this nice, like, cute little, like, single family home. And Dean's like, what is this, Harry and the Hendersons? And I was like, I knew it was coming. Like,
Dean, I know
I'm surprised it took him that long.
Yeah.
But they also make a joke where Dean and Sam are talking, and they're like, what kind of Bigfoot lives in this, like, would live in a house and, like, would have all this stuff, whatever. And Dean is like, he's like a deep woods Duchovny.
I'm like,
and then laughs at his own joke, and Sam looks at him, and then he immediately stops laughing. I'm like, oh.
You know Sam is tired of this shit. Like, he's exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how they haven't killed each other yet. But anyway, so they go up to the door, and they're like, hi, is your parents home? Like, is your mom home? Whatever. And the girl's like, no. You know, and they're like, is everything okay? And she's like, oh, are you here to help my Teddy? Like, he feels really bad. And they're like, oh, like, yeah, like, we're teddy bear doctors. And they show a fucking fake health department thing. There's a running gag with the health department. I'm like, okay. So they're like,
it is so funny because they're trying to, like, figure out what to say to this kid, and Sam is like, well, we're here to help. We are. And Dean's like, we are teddy bear doctors. And Sam's like, yeah, we're teddy bear doctors.
Like, isn't your job, like, lying? Like, why are you guys so bad at it? And she's like, oh my God, so glad you can help, whatever. And they're like, huh? And she's like, yeah, like, he's caused all this damage, whatever. Like, clearly he's the one who damaged the store, whatever. And they're like, what do you mean? And it's kind of shot kind of like a horror movie at one point, because they show, like, Dean opening the door, and she's like, I don't know, like, can you help him? She knocks on the door, and she's like, hey, she's like, Teddy, like, I brought some nice doctors here to help you, whatever. And, like, I think inside you hear, like, the TV going, and you hear someone, like, crying. And Dean opens the door, and you don't see anything. You just see his face, and he's like, hello? He looks at Sam, and he's like, oh my God. And what you see is there's this giant black teddy bear with a red bow, who's, like, life size, with big beady eyes, who's, like, drinking and sadly watching TV and having a fucking existential crisis. And
he's watching the news, and he's like, this world is so terrible. Like, everything is bad. Why do I live?
Like, why do I exist? Whatever. And Dean and Sam are like, what the fuck? And she's like, I don't know. And, like, the little girl's like, I don't know what to do, whatever. And they try to get some information out of her, and she's like, well, I wished for him to be real at the wishing well at the restaurant at Lucky Chin's. And they're like, oh my God, whatever. And so they're like, oh, this makes sense. People have been making wishes.
They also ask the girl, they're like, do you have, like, where are your parents right now? And she's like, they're probably in Bali, because my mom made a wish for them to go on vacation in Bali. So they're probably in Bali. And they're like, okay, do you have someone you can stay with? And she's like, I can go stay with the neighbor. But the other, which I was like, okay, that's really sweet. But there's another clip that's so fucking funny of Dean and Sam, like, Sam and Dean have stepped aside and this little girl is, like, waiting for them.
Oh, yeah.
And Dean is like, Sam was like, Dean, are we gonna have to kill this teddy bear? Are we gonna have to kill this teddy bear? And Dean's like, okay, I don't think that the teddy bear is the core problem here, so I think we probably don't have. I think maybe we just need to figure out the core issue. It doesn't seem like he's hurting anybody.
They're like, like, they legitimately don't know. I'm like, oh, so you don't know what to do when someone's having a manic episode. Got it. No.
No. But then that is a depressive episode. Let's be real.
That's true.
But they also, I say this because they do say something later in the episode that I'm like, oh my God, stop. But, about this teddy bear, but they're like, okay, so we're probably gonna have to figure this out. At that point, the girl is like, oh, it was from Lucky Chins, and they're like, okay, you need to go stay with someone, like an adult. And she's like, what's wrong with Teddy? And Sam is like, well, he has, and Dean's like, lollipop disease.
Again, and this is another moment where you're like, are you guys, like, can't you guys lie better? Like, isn't this your job?
She bought it, and they're like, he has lollipop disease. It's very contagious. You need to go stay with your neighbor.
And she's like, oh, okay, whatever. So they go back to the restaurant, and they just walk into this establishment. They ignore the owner or whatever. They just walk into this establishment, and they go to this wishing well. And Dean's like, okay, I'm going to test it. And they're like, yeah. And they're like, okay, how does it work? So Dean throws a coin in the well, whatever, and Sam's like, what'd you wish for? And he's like, I can't tell you. Like, that's whatever. And then immediately a delivery guy comes in and it comes in through the door, again, of a restaurant, and is like, an order of a sandwich for, I don't know what's on the sandwich, whatever, for Dean Winchester. And Dean's like, oh, like, clearly he wished the sandwich.
No. Yeah, he's like, who ordered a sandwich, like a very specific sandwich order? And Dean's like, oh, that would be me.
Like, okay, we get it, King. And so they're like, oh shit. Like, okay, we need to figure out, like, what this is. So they're like, okay, we need to figure out, like, what's going on with this fountain. So they're like, hi, we're health inspectors.
Well, the other thing, so that's not actually what happens.
Oh.
So they're like, Dean's like, oh my gosh, like, so Dean's sitting there eating this sandwich, and Sam's like, we have to figure out what's going on. And Dean's like, well, why do we? Because, like, you know, if people's wishes are getting granted, like, that's not a bad thing.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Sam's like, well, there's always some kind of catch. And, like, you know, maybe there's when have we ever seen something in our entire careers where you can get something and there's not a consequence? And Dean's like, well, I don't know, this sandwich is pretty good. And then at that point, the owner walks over and is like, you can't eat outside food here. I'm so sorry. And Dean goes, well, I'm sure as hell not eating the food inside. We're health inspectors.
And I was like, Dean. And the man running the establishment is like, we have a clean establishment. You're like, what are you talking about? Whatever. And he's like, we're health inspectors. Whatever. I'm like, Dean, do you not think that this poor man's business that you have been raiding several times, like, leave this poor man alone.
Yeah, they're like, you have a rat problem. And he's like, what, rat problem? Oh my gosh, like, no, we don't. I'm so sorry. Like, what are you talking about? And they're like, well, we have to investigate.
And you're like, okay. And so rat problem. And then they go to this fucking fountain, and they're like, okay, we have to clear the restaurant. We have to drain the fountain. And it's like in the middle of the day. Like, this poor man is like, what? And they drain the fountain, and they start, like, sweeping up the coins. And Dean asks Sam at this point, he's like, you know, were you tempted to make a wish? Like, what would you wish for? And Sam was like, I wouldn't wish for anything. Like, he's like, you know, he's like, if you could reset, if you had the chance to change your fate, would you? Like, he's like, well, what would you wish for? And he's like, wouldn't you want to wish that none of this ever happened to us? Whatever. And Sam, in a moment of a lot of emotional intelligence, is like, I wouldn't, because I'm a different person now, and I can't be that guy I was in season 1. And he's like, and if you did,
Dean's like, you wouldn't want to wish back before all this happened. You could be some big hotshot lawyer and working for some fuck-ass corporation. And Sam's like, no, girl. Too much has happened since then.
Yeah, and he's like, and if I did ask for anything, it would be Lilith's head on a plate. And you're like, whoa. I mean, that would solve some problems, not gonna lie. He says, a head on a plate, bloody. And you're like, Sam, we don't have time to unpack all that. They're sweeping up the coins, and then they notice an ancient coin at the bottom, and they can't pick it up. It's clearly stuck. And
I wrote down in my notes, who would win, two extremely strong men or one coin? Because it literally
so
shows
comical.
them, like, there's a part where Dean, like, gets a crowbar, and, like, the owner of the restaurant is watching them do this, and he's like, you're gonna destroy my fountain! And then, but Dean is, like, hitting it with a hammer, and, like, there's a part where, like, he tries to use a crowbar, and he can't pick it up, and he tries to hit it with a hammer to, like, break the fountain, and the top of the hammer breaks off and flies across the restaurant.
And it almost hits the owner, and you're like, oh my god. So...
negligent ass health inspector.
Yeah, and it's whatever. And so then Dean is like, okay, I gotta figure this out. I gotta go on research duty. And in the middle of this, Sam is like, oh my god, I just figured something out, and just leaves in the middle of Dean, like, taking apart. And this, remember, the owner thinks they are health inspectors. So Sam has just left in the middle, and they're like, what? Sam goes all the way to the fitness center and barges into the women's bathroom. And finds the ghost, who was a pervy teen who clearly wished for invisibility. Sam figured it out. He, like, puts his hand on his shoulder, and he's like, I know what you're doing. And he's like, stop. Because, like, there's this woman, and she screams, and then, like, runs away, whatever. And then he's like, this teen is like, whatever. And he's clearly naked, and he's like, I know what you did. Put on some fucking clothes. Like, Sam eviscerates his ass. And he's like, yeah, you're disgusting.
This kid is like, but he's like, I know you made a wish. This is what you wished for. Get out. Don't do this again and stay visible.
You're like, damn. Like, it's actually quite funny.
There's also a scene that happens right now. We see Dean, like, walking back to the hotel while Sam is doing this, and he sees, like, these same boys, like, from earlier getting chased by this other little boy, and Dean is watching them like, oh wow, that's weird, this one kid is chasing them. And the kid looks at him and he goes, you got a problem, mister? And he's like, no.
It's really like, damn. We have Sam go back to the hotel and find Dean, and you can hear Dean on the other side of the bathroom door just fucking vomiting his guts out, whatever.
Clearly. I know. And tell me what the fuck is wrong with me, because why in my notes did I write morning sickness?
Well, he is an Omega.
Yeah.
Well, Castiel's not in this episode, so when did he get pregnant?
Okay. Fuck if I know. I'm just saying. Listen, I'm not a writer. Can we get Ben Edlund on the line?
Ben Edlund, when did he get impregnated? Anyway.
Well, when someone leaves a profound impact on your soul, I don't know. Something Virgin Mary, something Immaculate Conception.
We can't be doing this. So you have Dean on the other side of the bathroom door. He's vomiting his guts out, and he's yelling to Sam, and he's like, the wishes, they turn bad. And he's like, the coin is cursed. I figured it out. It depicts, like, Tiamat, the Babylonian serpent deity to primordial chaos. And I'm like, you figured all that out before shimmy. I don't know why I'm laughing so hard. You figured all that out before
You'll get there. You can do it. I know you can do it.
You figured all that out before shitting your brains out.
Listen. Oh my god, the idea of shitting your brains out and throwing up at the same time. Ugh, that is such a Dean Winchester thing to do.
He's so IBS coded when you think about it. Yeah, so he's, like, talking about, like, Babylonian lore, quote unquote, while he's vomiting his guts out. And he's like, okay, the only way to stop it is to find the first wisher, and they can remove the coin and turn off the well.
So they also talk about, like, why this coin is what it is. And Dean's like, yeah, so it's, like, from what I can tell, based on the lore, this coin was made so it's, like, you would create chaos because, you know, one or two people's wishes coming true is, like, whatever, but if everyone is making wishes, then there's going to be utter chaos. Like, it will all turn bad and it will all go crazy, so there's gonna be chaos.
Yeah.
And Sam's like, yeah, like, I guess, like, that makes sense. And Dean's like, yeah, that's how you get, like, bipolar nut job teddy bear. And I was like,
leave him alone.
First of all, in what ways are those symptoms of bipolar? It's not as though he's switching betwixt moods. It's not as though he's having anything. If anything, I could see an argument for bipolar depression, but even that, he mostly just seems depressed.
Dean, read the DSM-5. Tired
no,
of you.
Literally, I'm like, no, I wish we could, as a society, stop using. I don't know. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not the first person to say this, but I wish we as a society could stop saying anytime anything is feeling a strong emotion, oh my god, bipolar. Girl, that is not what that is.
This is not even what that word means. Like,
no, it's not. I'm like, you're not even close.
Yeah. So we cut from Dean shitting his brains out to...
He's not shitting, he's throwing up, he has morning sickness.
What if
you're
it's
being
both?
insensitive?
What if it's both?
Oh god, that's horrible. He just shit his brains out because the sandwich was bad, but then he's also throwing up because he has morning sickness. Bad combo.
No, but I was saying, like, it cuts to the bear, and the bear is, like, crying. Content warning for suicide ahead about the fucking bear.
Attempted. It doesn't, before you get too worried about the bear, it doesn't work.
He takes a shotgun. I'm like, where did this bear get a shotgun? Puts it in his mouth, and then shoots himself. But they literally do it where they pan away, and you just see, instead of like a blood spray coming out the back of someone's head, it's the stuffing of the teddy bear. And you know that they thought that was hilarious when they did that.
And I'm not gonna lie, I laughed. I thought it was funny.
I remember this episode, people talking about it all the time. Like, what the fuck? And then it cuts back to his face and him just starting to cry because, like, it didn't work because he's a cursed teddy bear. He's not a person. And he's just, like, sobbing. And you're like, with a hole in the back of his, and you're like, what the fuck? And then it cuts to Dean having nightmares about hell. Like, sleeping badly, having nightmares, whatever. He wakes up and he's like, ugh! And Sam's like, hey, like, are you good? And he wakes up and immediately starts drinking. And you're like, uh-oh, Dean. And Sam's like, I literally live with you. I know there's something wrong. Like, you're drinking more than normal. You're not fucking sleeping. Like, be fucking for real. And Dean is like, I'm not going to answer you. I'm not going to tell you whatever. And Sam's like, fuck you, man. And
Sam is like, Uriel wasn't lying. You remember hell. And he basically is like, I just wish you would talk to me. Like, you don't have to, like, I'm not trying to blame you. I'm not trying to feel like give you shit. I just want you to talk to me so I can help. And like, I just wish you'd talk to me. And Dean says, be careful what you wish for.
And Sam's like,
Sam is like, oh, cute. Okay.
I'm like, Dean, you're not funny. But then they start to deduce, like, okay, here are all the wishers. When did they make their wish? Whatever. And they're like, how do we figure this out? And they're like, oh, we'll use the newspaper because some of them are announcing things. And they look in the newspaper and they figure out that this guy, Wesley, who was the nerdy guy on the date in the Chinese restaurant before, had to have been the first one because he is now announcing his engagement to this woman. And they're like, it's got to be him. And he announced it in the newspaper. And it happened before the guy who won the lottery and whatever. So, like, we got to find Wesley. He's engaged to this woman named Hope. And they find his house. And before we see Dean and Sam there, we see Wesley trying to have kind of a honest conversation with this woman, Hope. And he's watching TV, and she brings him, like, a fully cooked chicken with vegetables and everything. And she's like, I brought you a snack. And she's like...
He's also played by Ted Raimi.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my god, Ted Raimi. And Claudia was like, that looks like Seymour from Little Shop of Horrors.
Well, okay.
And I'm like, well, I mean, so true in his fit. Like,
well,
he is like if Ted Raimi was playing
yes.
Seymour.
Well, and they clearly styled him that way for the whatever. And I will say this episode is basically the plot of Little Shop of Horrors in a way, because it's all because one little nerd couldn't deal with his shit. So And it's like, and again, this is another case of Supernatural being like, what decade is this? Because it's like the decor in his house, what he's wearing. I'm like, again, what decade is this? This is why I'm like, what are you? Seymour from Little Shop of Horrors. So like this woman,
then if only Jinkx Monsoon was there, she would have done something about it.
Yeah, not to brag, but I am seeing her in Little Shop with Corbin Blue.
I'm so fucking jealous. I can't even express how jealous I am. I need a Jinkx Monsoon Little Shop of Horrors slime tutorial ASAP.
I will get right on it. I mean, I hope that when we go, it's not like, oh, they had an understudy or whatever. Even though I love seeing understudies, I just saw an almost full understudy swing cast for Hadestown. It was great. So it's clear that this woman Hope is like clearly like enchanted. She's like enchanted, and she's like, oh my god, like I just want to make you happy and just whatever. And so he's saying to her, and he's like, oh, like this is wonderful, whatever. But he's like, ever since we got together, whatever. He's like, well, I want you to do what you want to do. And she's like, well, I just want to make you happy, whatever. And he's like, okay, sure. And she's like, they're like making out, whatever. And then, and he's like, I don't know. And then Dean and Sam fucking ring the doorbell. And she's like, I'll go get it. And he's like, oh my God. And they come in the house and they're like, and she's like, oh, and they pretend to be the florists for their wedding, which is hilarious. I'm like, what about you guys as florists? Did you bring anything? Like, did you prepare? Okay. And she's like, oh, let me go get my binders to prepare for the wedding. And as soon as she leaves the room, they're like, we know what you did. How the fuck did you do this? Where'd you get this coin? And he's like, oh, fuck. And they're like, we know that you wish for her, whatever. And I will say, Sam Defender of Women keeps happening in this episode, because originally he was fighting that pervy teen, and this time he's like, ew, like, you are controlling this woman, fuck you. I'm like, all right, shout out to Sam. Dean, on the other hand, you're on thin ice. And so this guy eventually explains that his grandfather was in North Africa in World War II and brought back this coin. First of all, let's talk about colonialism. Second of all, and I'm like, well, that's what happens when your ancestors steal things. You get what you wish for. Ha ha ha. And he's like, yeah, I always had this coin, and I just have it. I had it displayed, and they ask him about this because Sam is like, oh, we see you're a coin collector, and they're like, oh, we've connected the pieces, and he's like, yeah, I actually got this one from my grandfather, but he told me like never to use it. He like told me it was a wishing coin, but he's like, I don't know like what it was, and I never did. And I don't know if he like got down on his luck or lost his job or something recently, whatever, but he's like, I just was like, all right, I'll go for it.
His grandfather died.
Oh,
and
yeah.
he was like, well, he died, so I might as well try it now.
And you're like, okay. And they're like, oh, so you wished for this girl to like you. And he's like, well, like, I didn't know, whatever. And they like straight up say to him, they're like, do you think that this is real? Like, is this what you actually wanted? Like, what did you like? Did you think this was going to be real? Like, is this actually what you want for her, or whatever? And he's like, I just want her to love me more than anything else. And they're like, do you think this is right? And you're like, damn, shit, like they're beating his ass. And he's like, do you want me to unwish it? Like, what do you want me to do? And they're like, yeah, that's exactly what you're going to do. And they like pull out a gun to threaten him. They're like, you're going to do it now. And he's like, no. This is where they pull out the Winchester privilege of being two large, conventionally attractive men to intimidate this stupid nerd, which I think is funny. So they put him in the car where they have a discussion about just that. And the guy, he's just like, he's sitting in the back of the car kind of moping. And he's like, well, you guys don't have to suffer through anything because you're like, hot and attractive and whatever. And they're like, the two of them look like pissed, like they're mad. And they're like, we've gone through a lot of shit, like you don't even know. They're like, pretty privilege doesn't count when you have been traumatized. They're having Tumblr discourse of insane proportions.
Literally, no. These guys would all get in the most toxic, fucking annoying discussion on TikTok comments that you're just like, oh my god, just DM each other. I'm gonna start blocking you. But There's also, it's so funny because also the boys are like, I don't remember which one says it, Sam or Dean, but they're like, people are people. I think it's Dean, but he's like, people are people because they're miserable bastards. Like, nobody gets what they want. And I'm like, damn. It's starting to get kind of sad because these two are just like, no one ever gets what they want. Like, that's part of being alive, is that you're always unhappy and you never get what you want. I'm like, you guys need to see a therapist.
Like, when he said that, I was like, oh my God, he sounds like me in the week before my period for real.
Literally.
Oh, dude, it's pregnant.
No, Dean is having, but the only problem though is Sam is also saying it, so I'm like, you guys are both just having a horrible.
The PMDD is beating both of your asses. Like, that's just shit I say on the regular. And like, and they would like, and they're like, because they say shit like that a lot of the times in the show, and you're like, damn, like that's crazy. And then, but like, they're like really down on it, whatever. And then, and then. They're having this discussion, and then they like hit something in the road, and they're like, oh, like what was that? And they don't see anything, and then it cuts to the invisible teen. They ran over, they hit the invisible teen, and he suddenly becomes uninvisible, and he's like, ah. And you're like, what the fuck? And they're like, what is this gag? So
and he's fine. Like, they hit him with this car, but he's standing up, and he's like, ow. Like, why are you invisible walking in the middle of the street?
What's wrong with you? So they're in the car. They're, like, approaching the restaurant, whatever. And they're like, you have to go in. You have to, like, take your wish back, whatever. And the guy's like, I'm not going to do it. And they're like, if you don't, and everybody can get wishes, think of the chaos that that's going to cause. And he's like, I'm not seeing any chaos. Like, calm down. And he says that, and then, like, comically, you look over, and you see a car where those boys who were running around are trapped in the car. They're screaming. They're trying to get out there, whatever. And the little boy who was chasing them is outside it, threatening them, whatever. And they're screaming and they're whatever. And they're like, guess we found the chaos, whatever. And Sam's like, okay, yeah, I'm going to go in the restaurant with them. And Dean's like, I'm going to figure out what the fuck is going on here.
It's so funny because this kid literally like picks up this truck and flips it over.
It's so funny.
And he screams, kneel before Todd.
And you know what? I love this child. He's justified. I think he's justified. Let him at him. So Dean is like, oh shit. And he's like, oh God, like this kid clearly wished for super strength and is like terrorizing his bullies back. And Dean is like, okay, like let me talk to him, whatever. And he's like, okay, like we can't do that, whatever. He kneels down to talk to him, and this kid just punches him in the face really hard.
He says, hey, you can't, like, listen, I get it. And he's like, those kids bullied me. They made my life miserable. So now I'm finally getting back at them. And he's like, listen, like, I totally get what you're saying. I totally get it. They probably are really bad bullies. But, you know, like, they don't have powers like you. With great power comes great. And this kid bitch slaps him across the parking lot.
Also, right before he says that, he also says something. He's like, well, I really understand. He's like, well, maybe I don't. Because I'm like, yeah, you were probably the bully, Dean. Like,
Dean was not bullying people, probably.
He was probably bullying just his brother.
Yeah, like, that's true.
Whatever, but like he's like, wait, I've always been like popular and attractive, so like maybe I don't get it, but like, and you're like, yeah, Dean, we know. And so like, and this kid's like, fuck you, and like punches him in the face, and Dean's like, oh shit.
Dean's like, I didn't want to have to do this.
Yeah. Oh yeah, he tries to like punch the kid, and the kid
he punches the kid, and then he's like, ow, my hand.
Yeah.
And then the kid starts beating the shit out of him.
It's really funny.
This is like maybe a 7-year-old.
The episode where Dean beats up a child, as I said,
he tries.
Supernatural has a gift for everything. I feel like, yeah, this kid looks like young Percy Jackson, which is funny. I'm like, yeah, Percy Jackson versus Dean Winchester. This is exactly how it would go.
Me when I see a young boy, this is just like Percy Jackson.
It's a little blonde boy. Oh my god, it's Percy Jackson. And it cuts back to the restaurant, and Sam is like, okay, and he's gonna get out of the car, and the guy is gonna get out of the car with him, and I think, and he's like, okay, let's go, and they're talking about something, whatever, and the guy's like, I'm not gonna do it, whatever, and suddenly, out of nowhere, a lightning bolt strikes Sam, and he fucking falls over and dies.
Oh, See, this is where I said, you know how I was like, I'm not going to reference 911 again. This is just like Buck from 911. Anyway.
Oh, wow. That's so, and in front of this Wesley guy, and Wesley's like, what the fuck? And it cuts to Hope, the woman who was magicked into loving Wesley, walking into the restaurant, and we see her at the wishing well. And Wes walks in and is like, Hope, like, what did you do? And she's like, I never wanted us to be separated, and that Sam guy was going to separate us. So clearly she wished that he would be killed by a stroke of God. And Wes is like, it's very like, you can't kill people.
Yeah.
it's
kind of the turning point where,
yeah, it's the llamas with hats. That's killing people.
Yeah.
Like,
oh my god, a llamas with hats reference in 2024.
I'm a millennial.
Yeah. Also it's funny because they show a wide shot of like the shopping, like the strip that this restaurant is in, and I did notice that there's a store like 3 doors down from it just called Fetish. And I was like it said it like on the banner, like out on the front of the store, it just said Fetish, and I was like, no, what is that?
And why would you call your fetish gear store Fetish? Like, that's not even creative.
Yeah.
Like, so
I mean, it might not be that. It could be something else. Maybe it's where maybe they sell religious iconography.
That'd be
stuff for your altar.
Listen,
I mean, that's technically a fetish.
Yeah. I mean, okay. So anyway, Wes is like, oh my god, I may have fucked up, whatever. And so he like hugs her, and he's like, I know what I have to do. And he turns around and he picks up the coin from the fountain, and he wishes that to undo it all. And he's like, Hope? Like, whatever. And she's like, and she just turns to him, and she's like, who are you? Like, where am I? And he's like, oh, fuck. And she just walks out, which is kind of crazy, but I'm like, was it a part of his wish that she wouldn't remember? I'm like, that's kind of crazy. She doesn't remember any of it, too. Like, that's nuts.
I don't think he made a wish to, like, undo everything. I think he just removed the coin and it undid all of the wishes. But I'm also like, the other thing too is we cut to another part with someone else who had a wish, and like everyone else remembers what happened, but she doesn't for some reason. And I think it's just it's like just like a writing thing to be like, oh, like this is what would be the most painful for him. Like they're not too worried about like the lore of it because it's over now, but it's also like
kind of gross.
I don't know. It's kind of a thing of like, even in a story where the whole point of this is that they're like, you know, like it's bad that you did this because this woman didn't have a choice in this, but it still treats the woman even in the story like an object. Like it's like she is not a character, she is just a thing.
Yeah.
Even in a story about how bad it is to treat a woman like a thing.
Yeah, it's very... Anyways.
It's not the worst that Supernatural's ever been, but it is like, oh.
It's like, okay. So we see Wes like kind of like sadly walking out of the restaurant. And this is the middle of the day, so I'm like, this poor restaurant owner has been losing out on business because of Sam and Dean for quite some time. He walks out. He gives Sam the coin. We cut back to Dean. This kid has been threatening Dean. He's going to, like, fucking kill him. And then suddenly he loses his powers. And they're like, well, this is awkward. So Dean is like, okay, I'm going to help you out. Dean's like, okay, I'm going to pretend that you still have your powers so that we'll scare off your bullies. So Dean, walks up in front of the other kids, and he's like, you guys better stay away from this guy. He's really scary. And then he like walks away, whatever. And the kids are like, ah! And they like run away from the kid, and the kid's like, heh. So like Dean was really nice about it, and you're like, all right, Dean, like you're all right. And then they cut to them on the pier, and it's again Vancouver tourism shot, and they're like, okay, the coins have melted down. It's not going to be an issue, whatever. And then Dean's like, okay, so you were right. I was lying to you. I do remember everything that happened to me in the pit. I'm finna be in the what? The pit.
No. And you know what? Maybe the real hell is spending $10,000 on Harry Styles tickets.
If you don't know that reference, it's good that you haven't been online too long. Dean Winchester. I'm finna be in the pit.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, and Sam's like, do you want to talk about it? Whatever. And Dean's like, no. Like, fine, I'll be honest with you that that's what happened. I'm not going to tell you what happened. I don't want to unpack it more. He's like, the things I saw, there's no way to make you understand, and you never will. And I just won't. And Sam's like, doesn't know what to say. And then they just walk away, and then the episode ends. And you're like,
yeah.
Oh, wow.
Sam is like, you can't shoulder this burden by yourself. Like, I'm here to help. And Dean's like, you couldn't understand, and I will never be able to make you understand. I don't want to unpack it. I don't want to do this. We are not doing this. That's it. That's end of story.
And you're like, oh, wow. Okay.
This episode is like, it has a lot of really good moments, as many Supernatural episodes do.
Yeah.
And I feel like even though there is some like I said towards the beginning, like some period-typical misogyny and like random racism, and especially like, I don't know, I know that it didn't end up being like, ooh, mystic, like East Asian magic that caused that, but the fact that it's like a fountain in a Chinese restaurant, it's giving Freaky Friday.
It's almost giving, like they changed course in the, like, they were gonna have it be that, and then they're like, no, it's just this random coin that someone threw in there, and you're like,
I think it was kind of like a bait and switch, where it's like, it was like a red herring, but I'm also like, why are we playing into the trope that like, oh, Asian magic? Like, girl, can we not do this?
Yeah, whatever.
I mean, I'm like, at least it subverted the expectation in the end, but still.
Yeah, and also, leave that man's business alone, Dean. Leave him alone.
But I don't know. I liked this episode. I think it is a nice like reprieve, because we've had a lot of like pretty heavy episodes all in a row.
Yeah, and it's a character piece also.
Yeah, this one had some heavier moments, like when Dean's talking about hell, but it's not like a seriously like intense episode. Like, overall, it is pretty funny.
Yeah,
and
this is
I think the other thing too is like this is the other thing too, at the end of this episode, when they're standing on this dock like talking about like hell, they see the little girl and her family walk back, and Sam's like, well, it looks like all the wishes have like gone back to normal, and they see the little girl holding the teddy bear who has like the back of his head, the stuffing is all coming out.
You're like, okay, so the
what are we doing?
The bear still has a hole in him, but the girl doesn't remember. That's crazy. Or the woman that Wesley wished on doesn't remember. I'm like, that's crazy. And also the parents who were in Bali are like, they're all sunburned and look unhappy. Like, it's really very funny. So like, it's fun. It's slayful. There's some things that maybe I would fix. But you're like, okay, all right. Dean is not talking about his feelings. Also, yeah, I do think it's the plot of Little Shop of Horrors, because it's like, well, down to like the slight amount of racism, because in Little Shop of Horrors, he's like, oh, there was an eclipse, and then I was in Chinatown, and I got this plant from this shop, and you're like, all right, Seymour. And then they have this Seymour guy wishing on a well in a Chinese restaurant, and you're like, really? What was the reason? Like, you could have done the same thing just with like I don't know, a random fountain or something.
Anyway, I think overall it was it was definitely an enjoyable episode. I think it's like the same with a lot of Supernatural, where it's like, as long as you don't think too hard about it, like, as long as you don't think harder about it than the writers intended for you to think about it, it's pretty good. Obviously there's like inconsistencies in the lore that you can pick apart, but I've said this before, like, I don't want to engage in like getting too nitpicky.
Cinema sins.
I think there's some things that like you should nitpick, because it messes with like the integrity of the story and like the stakes of the story, but there was nothing here that made me be like, okay, like, this is really fucking with the actual like the enjoyment of it. Like, it's like, okay, whatever. I don't know. I enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty well directed and pretty well like constructed.
Yeah.
So like, I would say overall pretty decent, pretty solid fun episode. And I think the next episode is pretty heavy. So because I think the next episode, spoiler for the next episode, we don't usually do this, but I think the next one is like Sam revealing like what he was doing while Dean was in hell, which is like,
oh, is it?
I think so.
Oh no.
Yeah, because that one's pretty. So it's nice we've had this little reprieve to talk about, like, here's all the gay people on network television, and also here's a silly wishing well episode, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway,
Anyway, shout out to Destiel Warrior, Ben Edlund, for this episode.
Yes. The sponsors of this episode, Destiel Warrior, Ben Edlund, Buck from 911, and all of the Yuri on Ice warriors who are suffering right now.
Shout out to Yuri and Victor. Good God. Anyways, thank you for listening. For more cursed supernatural content, you can follow us on social media at Mystery Spotcast on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Tumblr. You can also ask us cursed supernatural questions in our Tumblr Ask Box or by emailing us at themysteryspotcast@gmail.com. And also, thank you for listening, because we've had some like inconsistencies when we put out episodes, whatever, for things like, Mel and Ollie getting married and stuff like that. If you enjoy listening to us suffer, giving you an update on the state of gay media, all that kind of thing, please rate the show and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, any platform that allows for ratings, reviews. If you haven't done it already, tell a friend. It really helps people discover the show, especially when we have to go on an unexpected tiny little hiatus. Very helpful. Now that we've reached season 4, we are still backsliding into Destiel. So if you have any fic recommendations, you can send it to our form in our show notes. It's just for us to read, but we might shout one out that we like. If you have 911 fic for Ollie, you can send that as well.
The idea of sending a 911, me reading, being like, oh, there's a Destiel fan fiction, and then I was like, oh, buddy, what are you doing here? No.
It crossovers, whatever. If you want to hear more from us, we're also
so funny. Sorry, it's just so funny. The idea of Dean Winchester interacting with Angela Bassett's Athena Grant, very funny to me.
There's got to be good fic of it, because like at some point, like, when they
just
interact
by how big the fandoms are.
Yeah,
I know I've seen multiple. So
because they pretend to be the police or the FBI all the time, so it'd be really funny.
Girl, she would clock them immediately. There is an episode about a guy who pretends to be a firefighter, and it is so.
That's literally Dean.
No, that they would.
Anyways, if you want to hear more from us, we are also 2 of the co-hosts of RuPaul's Pod Race, a queer Star Wars and now other fun media podcast, which is currently doing a series on non-Star Wars media. But for the Acolyte, we are going to go back and talk about Star Wars. We had an episode about Baldur's Gate that Ollie is on. We talked about Pride and Prejudice. We've done a lot of fun things. So if you're not into Star Wars, you can still listen. And you can jump into any of our recent episodes. But see you 2 Tuesdays from now for more slaying people, queer baiting things, the supernatural business.